Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Yes, we do. We have Nina Turner on. She's going to talk about what's unfolding right now in Minneapolis, also what unfolded in Central Park with Amy Cooper and her thoughts on all of that. And also, she told me she has some policy ideas, like constructive steps to move forward, so I'm excited to hear from her about that. We also have Charles Booker. He is running in the Democratic primary for Senate in the state of Kentucky. He's up against Amy McGrath. She's sort of like the Democratic Party establishment choice. He's a progressive populist. Whoever wins that primary is going to go on to take on Mitch McConnell, so that's a big deal. Looking forward to speaking with him. But we are going to start with what is unfolding right now in Minneapolis.
Yeah, so in Minneapolis, of course, we covered yesterday the horrific death of George Floyd, who's basically police officers who have now been fired placed their knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd, and he died shortly after that incident. He was apprehended based upon suspicion of forging checks, nonviolent
basically
offense.
Passing a counterfeit bill is what it looks like.
An absolutely ridiculous charge in order to use this level of force against somebody. Now, protests have erupted in the city of Minneapolis. We have some footage of those protests yesterday, which devolved into looting. Let's take a listen and look a little bit at what we see there.
Those look like flashbangs. We know that cops deployed tear gas as well. You see there, people out in the street. And look, a lot of the protesters were calm. They were peaceful. Of course, the family of George Floyd and their attorney has called for the protest to be peaceful, and most people, of course, are heeding those calls. Others, however, setting things on fire, looting Target in particular, Walmart, AutoZone, other local businesses, defacing buildings, especially training their ire at the police precinct that the fired officers were at. You can see here fires erupting across the city. So pretty horrific scenes of violence as that city just erupts in outrage. And I think, Saagar, obviously, we do not condone this kind of violence whatsoever. No. You're not helping your cause.
No,
you are not. It's not a helpful direction. We've seen throughout our history nonviolence protests be incredibly effective. It's what the family wants, so you're disrespecting their wishes. But I also think part of the story here is just what a powder keg America is right now. I mean, not only do you have obviously a spate of racist violence that has captured the nation's attention and shocked and outraged us all, but you also have a situation where a lot of people are already up against the wall with the pandemic, with mass unemployment. So I think when you see something like this erupt, it really just makes you realize how close to the edge we all are living right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. You have mass unemployment, you have so much of this, and you have the way that dissecting and sorting through these things is so difficult, especially in an incident like this where it seems so clear that what happened was wrong. I literally don't see anybody who's defending these officers who've been fired in this particular case. I was showing you before the break, Sean Hannity was last night talking about, he's like, listen, I know martial arts. He's like, you touch somebody's neck, it's one of the most sensitive areas of the body. You're going to choke them out. You're going to cause them extreme bodily injury. That's exactly what happened. Bernie Carrick, former NYPD, people who are pro law enforcement. I consider myself very pro law enforcement. Look at this, and you can say be like, this is unequivocal. This is absolutely wrong. And then you said, as you pointed to, these protests and the way that we have to cover and we have to think about this is we always have to, and this is what we stand on, we have to condemn mob violence in this way. This is not a race thing. This is not in any way, looking at it and trying to condemn the race of any of the people who are involved.
Look, I saw all kinds of people behaving badly of all different stripes.
Exactly. There's plenty of video of people of all different races who are behaving terribly in this situation. As you said, we need to respect the family's wishes on this. Peaceful protest is one of the most American things that you can do in this particular case. I do think it can be a possible healing moment for the country. The president tweeting yesterday, talking about how, saying at his own request, he's asked the Attorney General and the FBI and the Department of Justice in order to get involved in the investigation. Say, I have asked for this investigation to be expedited and greatly appreciate all of the work done by local law enforcement. My heart goes out to George's family and friends, and justice will be served in this particular incident. So you can see that there is not any sort of resistance to the idea that these officers should be punished. I know the mayor of Minneapolis was on television. I think he was on CNN last night, and he was asked very pointedly. He said, "Why are these men not in jail?" He didn't have an answer. Not a good answer.
Right. Well, I mean, and I'm glad to see the president's tweet on this. He jumped right on top of this. That's to his credit. However, if you look over the course of his administration, there have been efforts underway to roll back some of the civil rights enforcement in the DOJ, in particular, the use of consent decrees to reform police departments. So that is the history of this administration, but glad to see in this specific case. And to your point about there's really no other side to the story, the more we learn, the more that seems to be the case. What did the officers say here? The officers said that George Floyd had been resisting arrest, and that's part of what justified this type of ultimately lethal force being used. Well, that turns out not to appear to be the case. We have new video from one of the local restaurants that captured as he stepped out of the car. He was obeying commands, does not appear to be resisting. So it looks like the officers were lying about that particular detail. And even if he was resisting arrest, this type of maneuver, what the police chief has said, is illegal to start. They don't allow that. They don't train on it. They don't allow it exactly because this type of situation. So there really is no justification here. We also, if you'll recall from watching the horrific video of his death, you have witnesses there on the scene, basically like, what are you doing? Stop. He's not responding. Does he have a pulse? One of those witnesses is now speaking out about watching this all unfold. Let's take a listen to that.
Bro, they wanted to kill that man, bro. Like, I'm gonna be 100, bro. They didn't speak. They didn't say nothing. The views in his eyes, bro. The man that had his knee on his chest, bro. He knew what he was doing. His shimmies in my man's neck, bro. He knew what he was doing. It's just like having a jiu-jitsu choke. If I'm here, I'm shimmying, boom, my choke's on there. I told him it was a blood choke. He knew it was a blood choke. He looked at me when I said it. He put his head down. He did not make any more gestures. He did not say any other thing. And the two other cowards that was on the other side of the car, I didn't know nothing about. I didn't know about until I got videos in my social media and things like that. So they was intent to smother my man and kill my man. And I seen it. I seen it in his eyes. I seen it in his demeanor. And I seen it in their movement.
It's terrible. You can see Mr. Williams talking about exactly what we're here, which is that anybody who knows this is a sensitive area and the way that this is handled. I do think that, and this is what we said at the beginning, which is that this type of violence, I mean, it's just detracting from a situation where everybody in the country agrees that these police officers acted in the wrong, should be punished to the full extent of the law, that the federal government, I mean, nobody is defending it. And so, and I have seen, I mean, people who are supporting some of this mob violence, people who are stoking it, people who are excusing it. And I just think a message to those people is, if you want to actually get what you want, then this is the exact wrong way to go about it, which is that this is not a situation which demands this type of violence in order to try and get a political outcome that you desire. The political outcome is occurring in this particular incident. And so this is just one of those areas where, look, if you're a pro-law enforcement, like somebody like me, others like on the right, then you need to be able, it is incumbent upon you actually to always call out the worst actors within your system, and in order to show that. And I think that the same is for those who want to see justice in cases like this.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving Fox News a talking point, right? There was no other side to the story.
There was no
other like counter narrative. And so you've created this narrative of legitimately, bad behavior, et cetera. And look, there's like a lot of opportunistic actors who basically see the meltdown of civil order and see chaos unfolding, and they jump in and take action. So, I mean, your points are well taken, but I do think that you also have to look at the broader system that we are living in, the way people have been pushed to the edge, and see this explosion of violence and unrest as a symptom of that broader problem. The question is, what happens now? I mean, do these protests and riots, do they die down in the city of Minneapolis?
Right.
Do they spread across the country? Because I don't think that we should look at this as a local story. It's not a local story. Part of why this was so explosive is because you had Ahmaud Arbery, because you had Breonna Taylor in Louisville being shot and killed in her own apartment from an arrest warrant served on someone else, right? It's because you've had these series of events occur that you come to this moment where there is this explosion of unrest, violence, and protest. So are we going to see those protests build across the country? What is that going to look like? And what is ultimately going to lead to? Because some of what I see, at times is like there's an attempt to be like, oh, it was just these bad actors. So just deal with these bad actors and then we're all fine. But when you look at the pattern across the country, when you look at the stats and the data of who disproportionately dies at the hands of police violence, you know that it's not limited to these actors. And even if you look just specifically at Minneapolis, they have a broader problem within their police department that clearly needs to be addressed.
Sure, but we also blow up, of course. I mean, this is how media works. We blow up the worst of incidents, and then we try to build, off of extraneous incidents.
No, look at the data.
You can look at the data as well. But I mean, what I'm saying is that you cannot use these types of incidents in order to push back on the idea that we shouldn't have a police force. Because truly, I see this from so much of the American left does not believe in a criminal justice system. That's the truth. They do not believe in an actual criminal justice system or punishing people who do bad things, especially through the use of law enforcement. And calling the police.
I think that's largely a straw man. People don't support a racist criminal justice system.
People don't. No. They don't support actual criminal justice, and you can see this in the city of San Francisco, where they don't actively discourage people from calling the police whenever people are committing crimes. That is absolutely ridiculous, and that's not how you can live in a formative society. So again, drawing away conclusions on one side, which is that law enforcement is always good, is an idiotic idea. Drawing away the conclusion that law enforcement is always racist is also ridiculous.
Sure.
We have to live in a functioning polity. We have to focus on the ability of how do we mesh this country together, on some sort of how do we enforce our laws. This is a way of politics. That's what politics is all about.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't think that pushing any sort of narrative anyway is helpful, I think.
Well, I also think that coming out of this and looking larger picture, there is a very interesting political dynamic as well, which we interviewed, a representative from the Trump campaign yesterday who wanted to seize on Joe Biden's history.
Right.
Hit the 94 crime bill, the Biden crime bill that he was the architect of. He really was a leader in the tough on crime, quote unquote, movement within the Democratic Party, which has led to racist mass incarceration across the country. And again, this is not about extrapolating one example. That's based on the data, who gets locked up disproportionately and why. So they want to seize on that. And they have some record to be able to run on because he can point to the First Step Act. He can point to Alice Marie Johnson. So there is something there. But when I said to him, okay, what's the next step? Well, we don't really know. We'll get back to you. We're still figuring it out. So where does this do they actually come out with additional criminal justice reform policies and ideas that they're going to use not only to, reform the system, but to try to appeal to a broader demographic of voter? Are they just going to try to weaponize Joe Biden's past in order to try to tarnish him on the issue? Or is there real substantive shift on the Republican side of the aisle on this issue? Because look, the Democratic side of the aisle, Lord knows, we call them out here, far from perfect. And Joe Biden in particular has not apologized for his role in that crime bill, still advocates for it to this day, is not nearly where I would like to see him be on drug decriminalization as one example. But the Republicans, it's been very sort of haphazard, the movement and the evolution on this issue. So is there more of a full-throated agenda that comes out of this? Look, it can be on a political cynicism, fine, whatever. But you could see in yesterday's interview that we did an attempt to rhetorically get to the left of Joe Biden on this issue. Will they follow through with an actual plan and policy?
I think they make a mistake there, and I've always said this, which is that, and Adolph Reed made this point perfectly yesterday on our show, talking about criminal justice reform and mass incarceration as the only issue to black voters is a form of racism in itself. Is that thinking that these people only vote on mass incarceration is absolutely ridiculous. No, people vote in order to improve the material conditions of their lives. In some cases, disproportionately in the black community, that does include criminal justice. But Marco Rubio actually had a great op-ed out yesterday talking about how the response to this pandemic is exacerbating much of the economic disparities that we see in different communities of color, and that by promoting ubiquitous economic solutions, that you can cut across class, race, etc. lines and lift everybody up out of this. And that's what I think that the overall message of so much of the shooting, of the economic response, of the way that we talk about race and class politics has to shift towards, which is that there is a way out if we all act as one, because again, we live in a racially heterogeneous society, multi-religious, multi-ethnic. It's literally, it almost never works out in history. And it's been working out not well for some people for a long time, but it's still there. And that is the only way that this actually happens. So I think that any effort to to cut it on towards white, black, Hispanic, trying to cut people into different cleavage groups and run on single issues things, the one thing that we all need is to live as people and flourish in our economy.
Yeah, and have actual justice.
Yes.
I mean, Adolph Reed, and you're absolutely right to say it's just this one issue. I'm very much against that type of politics because it only focuses on one aspect of your identity or one part of your life, one part of your experience to the exclusion of all others. And I think the Democrats have been very guilty of that. I think Republicans have been guilty of it as well. But you also can't pretend it's not an important issue, that it doesn't affect massive amount of people. I mean, we see people in the streets, and not just violent people. We see a lot of peaceful protesters who are outraged at what they see unfolding and what they see as a pattern based not just on shocking videos, but based on data that we've been able to uncover. So I do think it's an issue that is critical. I think it's critical to all Americans, but especially to people of color. And, there's an interesting political moment where out of cynical political expediency, I think the president and the Republicans feel that it is appropriate to be somewhat on the right side of this issue. And that may be an encouraging thing to take out of all of this ugliness.
Maybe that's how it works.
We're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.